What's up, everyone? My name is Jeff. This is Jeff Brown Tech. We are continuing along in our course on PowerShell command line 2 scripting, where I'm going through some topics to help you take your scripting skills to the next level. This is the last module that I've titled The Art of PowerShell Scripting, really just going through some of the things I think would help you improve your PowerShell scripting skills, some other resources. This isn't super technical module, just more talking about the thought process I usually have when I'm writing scripts and functions and modules and all that fun stuff, and how I build upon that and really how I get started with it and then working through the process. As always, this code that I have available here, the link for it is down in the video description out in my GitHub repository. If you're just coming across this video, I'll also include a link to the full playlist down in the video comments. It's a mixture of new and old videos from my channel that will slowly take you through all these different topics and give you some more advanced things and examples to work through. That is it for introduction. Let's go ahead and go take a look at our README here and go over what we're going to cover inside this module. We'll go ahead and expand out Module 7 here and open our README and look at the preview here real quick. As I mentioned, this is the final module. We'll talk about how you write clean, professional, and production-ready PowerShell scripts. We'll take a look at best practices, formatting code quality, and how you can prepare to make your code reusable and be able to make it shareable to other people. So it's not just a one-off tool that you're using. Really make it into something special that other people can use very easily because it follows PowerShell conventions. We'll just skip down to the lessons here. We'll first talk about planning your script, problem solving, and your logic building, just the process of going through and identifying the issue and how you're going to approach writing your script. Next, we'll talk into lesson 2 about some common best practices that you might not be aware of when you're writing PowerShell scripts. And along that same line, in lesson 3, we'll go look at PSScriptAnalyzer. It is a module you can download and use to run against your scripts and functions to look for best practices, and it'll give you suggestions and other things you can take a look at to improve your scripts. I'll then go over some other external resources that helped me in my journey in becoming a better PowerShell script writer and everything, a couple of video courses and a book, and yeah, we'll go from there. So that does it for our introduction. Let's go ahead and close this out. These aren't Jupyter notebooks, they are just markdown files. So if you right click and open preview, it'll bring it up and you can see all the format in here as intended. Again, not super technical here. We're not writing really any code or executing anything, just talking through how to write PowerShell scripts. Before you begin writing a script, the first thing you need to think about is planning it and identifying what exactly you're trying to do and going through the logic, clarifying the problem, breaking it down into more manageable steps and how you can approach writing the script. And the first thing you need to do is understand the problem. And really, that's what are you trying to accomplish? What do you want this function to do? What do you want this script to do? Is it just creating a user? Is it offboarding a user? Are you needing to duplicate or check for log files? Are you restarting services? What is this script supposed to do? We talked about this a little bit when we were talking about writing functions and everything. When you write functions, they have a singular purpose. They should just do one thing. Your scripts, I would also be careful about including too many things into them. A script can be the wrapper around a whole bunch of things, but I would really worry about making it too large or doing a lot of things because this just introduces more opportunities for things to break and go wrong. When you're going through this script, start thinking about some of the things we've been talking about and what are the inputs? What information do I need to give this script for it to work? Is it going to be a server name? Is it going to be a username? Will it be a service that I need to restart? And then again, looking at how I can make it reusable and not hardcode things. Let's make that a parameter that I can then pass into the function or script and make it work that way. Next, are there any special rules or error conditions I need to watch out for? Maybe you pass it a username that you want to offboard. Well, one of the first things you need to do is check, does that user actually exist? Don't assume that it exists. Somebody could mistype the name. You need to start thinking about how things can go wrong. We talked about that in the error handling module. What could happen that makes the script break and fail to run? I need to start thinking about and accounting for those things. I know it's easy for thinking in an ideal world that everything goes right, but it just doesn't go right. And then also having other people evaluate your script and everything, because you can make assumptions on yourself when you're writing it. Somebody else could look at it and go, oh, I thought you meant this, and do something that completely breaks it. And then at the end of the day, what do I want this script success to look like? And have a little bit of example here, just written out. I need a script that checks the free disk space on a list of servers, maybe one or more servers, and then it will email me if any of that disk space is less than 10%. So that is our thesis, if you will. That's our problem statement of the script we want to write. Now that we have a good idea of what we want our script to do, then we need to start breaking it down. So let's bring our sentence back up here. I need a script that checks free disk space on some servers and emails me if it falls below 10%. So I can identify like 4 different things there. We need to know how to get free disk space. I need to pass it in one or more servers. I need to know how to email something, how to send an email inside a PowerShell script. And then I'm checking for a condition here if that disk space is less than 10%. And then breaking down the problem is exactly that. I need to get a list of servers. How am I going to get that list of servers? Is it going to be in a file name, CSV file? We talked about that. You could have input files and be able to import that and process it. Is it just going to be a parameter where they can list one or more servers? Maybe I can do both. There's a thing called parameter sets where you can have different parameter sets available inside your function or script. You could provide the list of servers in a file name, or you could add them as a parameter, one or more of them as an array. How am I going to get this list of information of the servers? How do I then need to connect to each server to get the information I'm looking for? How do I then find disk usage on the server? How do I then compare that against my threshold, which is 10%? Maybe 10% is settable when I run the command. Maybe I'm curious, hey, show me ones that are less than 20, less than 10, less than 5. That could be like a information warning error type of usage in there. Maybe that's a parameter we can set. Maybe it defaults to 10%, but you can set it. How do I then store those results? And then how do I iterate through them and say, let's find the ones that meet my threshold and then send an email? Lots of different things there. Just from that single sentence, I need to know how to go through and do each of these. I don't do this a lot, but I'm going to suggest it just in case it helps you. There is a thing called pseudocode, which means fake code. You're writing code just in more plain language. It's not in any programming language like that, but it helps you start writing out the script and thinking what I need to do here without worrying about syntax, without worrying about, am I writing something the correct way? You're just writing out the logic here. So let's take a look at what that would look like. Just at a basic level, for each server in my list of servers that I have, I'm going to try to connect to it. If that connection is successful, then how do I get the free disk space? And then if my free space is less than 10%, maybe I just add it to a list of servers that I'm keeping track of that meet this criteria. And then if that list is not empty, meaning I found servers that meet my criteria, how do I send an email? Again, not worrying about syntax, not worrying about maybe even necessarily proper formatting or anything. I'm just walking through the logic of what I want to do here and then getting a better idea of what that would look like. Next, let's talk about then starting to create your script. You might start out with hard-coded values. Maybe you start writing it and you're testing each line, making sure the logic works and you understand how to actually perform the functions that you're going to do, but then start breaking it out. In this case, we have our server list. We have an array of strings. It could be one or more. I have my threshold here, so I set that as a parameter. I wrote out 2 functions here. I don't actually have the full code for it. I'm just showing an example here of what this would look like if you were to start writing this out. So I have 2 functions, getting my disk usage and sending an alert email. And then here's our main logic of our script for each server in my server list, which is a parameter I'm going to try. So this is the first thing I'm going to run into. What if I try to connect it out to that server, or this is running on the server? First thing I'm doing is getting my disk usage, which is my function here that I wrote. If the free percent is less than this threshold, we are going to add the alert to the list. Notice I don't have all of my code yet. I'm just adding comments and everything as I go through. If we run into an error getting disk usage, okay, let's catch that error. And then if my alert list count is greater than 0, I'm going to send my alert email. Notice I still don't have all my code here, but this is starting to take shape. I'm starting to go through and say, okay, what's happening here? And what would this script look like as I start getting through and identifying the rest of my code that I need to write? I already have a couple of parameters here, but let's go into the next part where you're saying maybe I need to add some other parameters here. Do I need to add validation to the parameters? Am I importing a file. Let's make sure that file exists before I try to run it so my script doesn't run into an error. Start thinking about what happens if something fails. What if I try to connect to the server and it's not available? I need to account for that. What if it runs into a problem getting local disk? Hopefully that's not an issue. That would probably mean there's an error at the operating system level, but that could happen. And one of the big things here is there any logic or condition that is repeatable? This would go great into making your own little function, like you're adding to a log file, getting disk space, anything like that. It just kind of helps shorten your code a little bit in the sense that your main logic here that we have in the script is kept pretty short. And then you just have these utility functions here for getting disk usage and sending alert emails. I mean, this is something you're doing over and over. So why not just have a little function that does it for you? If that concept is still unfamiliar or you're uncomfortable with it, sure, write out the usage right here on how to get disk usage and everything. But then think about, could I turn this into a small little reusable tool and put it somewhere in the script and treat it, like a commandlet basically. And as we've already talked about, some tips for effective planning when you're writing out your PowerShell scripts. Don't rush into writing the script. Start thinking through the problem and the logic and everything. Use pseudocode. I've done flowcharts before where I've just said, okay, I'm going to do this. If this happens, and I try to walk through the logic of everything, maybe that helps you out a little bit better. Like I said, I don't typically do pseudocode. Same thing, if I'm writing an English paper or something, I really don't do rough drafts or anything. I do kind of start writing the script. I know I'm telling you to not rush into that, but I found that's what works for me. So maybe that doesn't work for you. Maybe walking through pseudocode and everything makes sense to you, or maybe you feel better just starting to write the script. Maybe it just comes with experience. Slowly build out. I think this is the big thing, incrementally, and test each piece as you go. Maybe the first thing that you're doing here is, how do I get disk usage on a server? And you figure out that little part. And then you say, okay, how do I do this on multiple servers? Okay, let's put some error handling around it. How do I, if I find a server that meets my criteria, how do I add that to an array or something and keep track of that? How do I send an email? Those are all just the incremental things that you can go through. Don't start just like at the top, like, oh, I'm going to have a parameter for this and this and this. You can always go back and refactor your code. You can change it to make it better and better and better as you start figuring out some of these things that you're working on. And again, going back down here, the thing to talk about, assume errors will happen and try to plan for them as much as possible. You're not going to think of everything. It does come with experience. And then going back to reusing functions as needed, writing out those small bits of code for you to do. Okay, that does it for our first lesson. Really straightforward, just talking about planning and a couple of tools there in pseudocode, flowcharts, whatever else you need to start thinking about planning for your script or function here. Now let's go talk about some PowerShell best practices inside of lesson 2 here. As I mentioned, writing the script is just the beginning. What you want to also start thinking about is, what are some best practices when I'm writing PowerShell that will separate you from writing, a beginner level PowerShell script or function into more professional grade tools that are helpful to other people and make them easily readable by other people too, if they ever take a look at your code. First thing I want to talk about is naming conventions. Make sure you have consistent naming conventions and descriptive names and everything for your variables, functions inside your code. Talked about this a little bit when defining variables and keeping your casing and everything consistent, whether it's a parameter or a variable inside of your script or function, and just being very descriptive about your names. For an example here, we have disk usage equals 20. That's pretty straightforward. What's the usage on my current disk? Is that 20%, 20 megs? There's different things there, but the big thing you might come across in seeing other people's scripts and everything is they might just abbreviate it DU for disk usage or just X. When you're looking later inside that script and you take a look at this and you go, what does DU mean? You shouldn't have to scroll back up and see where this variable is defined or where it gets its value from. That's very vague and it's abbreviated and it doesn't help anybody. Even yourself, you might come back to a script a year later and be like, I don't remember what this means. Writing this out to disk usage, even disk usage, like GB for gigabytes or something like that. Don't make your variable names like 30 characters long, but use this space here. Use it up. Be very descriptive in what you're doing. As you know, if you've been working with PowerShell, you have functions and commandlets and everything. We talked about this, I think, a little bit, where it's the verb dash noun. It's very consistent. So you like set user. This is making a change to the user. We are converting to JSON. We talked about those commandlets and everything. You should also follow those same conventions. Nothing's stopping you from doing that. So follow the verb noun format. We have get user report. That's very straightforward. I'm going to get a report about users. I know it's not making any changes or anything because my function is get. But here our verb is set, meaning it will change something. So we are going to set our configuration file here. I know if I run this, it's going to make a change. And there actually is a list of approved PowerShell verbs. I don't know if we ever went over this before, but you can run get verb. What is this going to do? It's going to get our list of approved verbs. Let's actually jump out to a PowerShell window and take a look at these. And if we just run get verb, and you can see what I normally do is I sort it by the verb name because I usually have a verb in mind and I want to make sure it's an approved one or anything. So I sort it alphabetically. So we'll go like this. And if we scroll back up through in alphabetical order, we have add, approve, assert, backup, block. We have edit, enable, enter, exit. Here's all your list of approved verbs and a little description here on the right of when you should apply it. Now, that's not always a perfect one-to-one ratio. You might say, well, I'm not quite doing what this description says, but if the verb makes sense, then use that verb. If you don't run this by sorting verbs here, let's go back this way. It will group them by their functionality. So if you're working with data here, what are some things I could do? I can back up, I can compare my data, I can press it, I can group it, I can edit it. There's communications, there's just common ones. If you're ever wondering what verb you can use for naming your scripts and function and everything, just run get verb. Here's a great list. Everything should run into this. You should be able to use one of these. You will occasionally see, I think the SharePoint PMP module, when you go to install it, it'll warn you saying, hey, there are unapproved verbs being used inside this module. So that's what this is referring to. They wrote a function or a commandlet or something that is using a verb that is not in this list here. And applying that same logic out to your script files, we have check disk space. We are exporting Azure users. The naming should just be very, very clear in exactly what it's doing. The next example is just talking about formatting and layout of your scripts and everything, making sure you are consistent and it's readable using white space and everything. First thing here, indenting lines of code inside of code blocks and everything. It says 4 spaces. I mean, you're just going to be hitting the tab or hitting your space bar, whatever there, but just making sure it's consistent. Make sure you're using line breaks. Don't put a bunch of things on one line or jumble things together. It's not going to hurt your script if you have things on multiple lines. If you have a really long line or a really long command, it says keep it to 100 characters. I usually just try to keep it to what's viewable on my screen, maybe a little less, so somebody has different resolution or anything like that. Keeping consistent with your curly braces here when you're defining code blocks. I've gone back and forth in my learning programming and everything where I will put this curly bracket on the same line here, say like an if statement, if space use is greater than 90, then curly bracket, and then you have a curly bracket here. I think when I took some classes in C++ one time, and the convention there usually was to have that curly bracket here, and then right warning would be on its own line. So that way your curly brackets line up, from left to right. I don't know if there's any wrong or right way. Just be consistent what you're doing. And if you ever come across a language where for some reason you have to do it that way, maybe something that's very strong like Python and its indentation and everything, just know you'll have to follow that convention and everything. We haven't talked too much about putting comments in your code, but we have seen them in my examples and everything, and then also putting together documentation. You have inline comments here. So if you just have a single line, you can use the # here or the hashtag. And this is just explaining what this piece of code is doing. It's going to skip if the server is not reachable. So we're running test connection. And if that is not successful, then we just continue on. We did talk about comment-based help a little bit. This is using multi-line here. So we have the less than # and a greater than #. That means everything in between here is going to be a comment. And in this specific case, we are adding comment-based help to our functions and scripts, just describing what it does. Synopsis, another keyword is description. We define and list out parameters and what they do and can include examples. If you want to take a look at this more and haven't watched the full videos, I believe we had this inside of our functions module here where we talked about defining those. You can do this exact same thing on your PowerShell scripts though in your PS1 files, just put it at the very top. Next is making sure you're outputting and messaging things correctly inside of your scripts. We've seen quite a few examples that I have done here throughout this course where I'm using write output. I'm outputting an object, I'm outputting a string, I'm just putting that into the output pipeline there and it will display on the screen or through the pipeline there. We also have write information. This is a little bit newer. It says introduced in PowerShell 5. For some reason, I thought maybe it was a little later. It might be PowerShell 6. I'd have to double check on that. This was in response to kind of replacing write host, and we'll talk about write host here in a little bit. But you're just putting out information. You're just giving information. The backup process started at this. Include that in your script, and it'll put it out to the screen or whatever. By default, information messages are not displayed unless you change your information preference. We've talked about error action preference. This is just another preference. Do I display this information or not? And you can enable that by setting this variable to continue. Or when you run your script down here, information action is continue. Write information is great for logging or emitting structured information during a run using verbose or without using verbose or polluting the output stream. When would you use write information? I actually haven't used this that often, but you might see it inside of other scripts and functions. You're just displaying general status messages. It's not an error. It's not a warning. You're not putting out debug information. Just outputting this for logging or custom UI tools. We have another option in write verbose. You can just use the write verbose commandlet and saying, again, being very verbose in what your script is doing. You might be able to use this for debugging or just giving more information to whoever's running your script. And whenever you run the script or function, just as long as you've put in commandlet binding, we've talked about that when writing advanced functions, and you can put -verbose when you call it, and it'll display those verbose messages that you're using write verbose with. We also have write warning and write error. We've seen these a little bit when we're talking about error handling. You're just going to write a warning out to the output stream, or writing an error. It'll puts out some more red text on there and display a little bit more information. Going back over all these different options that you have for outputting information into the PowerShell pipeline, there's this idea of, output streams. I'll be honest, I'm not exactly sure what these are, but there's different stream levels when you're working with outputting things in PowerShell. Going back through our options, we have write output. This is going to send data in the pipeline. So if you are chaining commands together, whatever you've done with write output, it'll send it out to the next part of your pipeline there. Write verbose, just additional detailed information on what's happening inside your script. Write warning, write error, and then write information, just general information messages. Now, I mentioned write host earlier. You'll get some very strong opinions in the PowerShell community about avoiding using write host. What it does, it just prints to the console. Like the PowerShell window I brought up earlier, that's your console. But it does not put any data into the pipeline. And that's why people will tell you to avoid using it, because it's not super useful. You might write host out a bunch of things, but if that script is running without someone watching it, it's in a task scheduler or some type of automation or everything, write host is really not going to do much for you because it's just printing to the screen. It does have its place. Maybe for troubleshooting, you just need to put something out while you're writing a script to see what's going on. You'll hear the phrase write host kills puppies every time you use it. I don't like being that dramatic about it because it's a tool. Just use it if you come across it or you see somebody using it. I don't get too upset by it or anything, and I might use it real quick to troubleshoot while I'm troubleshooting something. But that being said, since you're new to writing scripts and everything, take a look at all of these commandlets here instead and use those appropriately. We've talked about error handling already back in module 5 here, but using your try-catch blocks to catch errors and be able to handle them so your script can continue running. We talked about error action, making sure you include that to make sure your error is terminating so it goes into your catch block. a couple of different ways to look at getting your errors. There's the built-in error variable. You can also run get error. That is a newer commandlet, PowerShell 6 or 7. I can't remember what we said before. A big thing we've also already talked about is try to avoid hard coding values inside of your script. For example, back to our disk space one, if you hard code threshold 90% use space maybe or something like that, or you're hard coding your list of servers, that means each time you go to run it or you want to change this, you have to go edit the script instead of doing the more PowerShell-like thing and having a parameter with it or something where you can pass that value in. And then here's our example of that using inside parameters. We have threshold. It's an integer value. We'll set it to 90. We can set a default value if we want, but we also want to be able to change it and then be able to pass in one or more servers in an array. A big thing you'll come across people talking about is also avoid using aliases inside of scripts. I don't know if we've talked about aliases too much, but it is just another name for a commandlet that's shorthand. In this example here, ls for listing or whatever corresponds to get child item. That's an alias for it. GC is get content. The question mark here is where object. So maybe you're doing some filtering in the pipeline there. %sign is an alias for each object commandlet here. Now, if you're just writing out in the PowerShell command line window, you're just running a command that you need to do, aliases are awesome. In this example here, you might go out and run this. You're saying, hey, give me all the child items of files that end in .log for logs, pipe that over where the length or the size of the file is greater than 1 megabyte. This is awesome. Great if you're out in the command line window. It's shorter. You can type it maybe a little bit faster, all that great stuff. If you're going to put this into a script, best practices say put out the full command, get child item, where object, and there's the rest of it. Big thing is why. If you are somewhat new to PowerShell or maybe you don't know these aliases exist, you might look at this command and have no idea what it is doing. What is ls? What is this question mark? What are all these different things doing it? Putting things like this into your script where it looks like PowerShell. That's the big thing. This doesn't look like PowerShell. What is this? What are these aliases? Whatever. There's no verb dash noun or anything. Putting it what it would look like inside of PowerShell just makes it easier to read, and someone else coming across your script who is using it or maybe needs to make changes to it knows exactly what where object is, knows what get child item is, and doesn't have to go look up what these aliases are. Talked about this in lesson 1 also a little bit, using functions and modular logic, the get disk usage, send alert, just breaking those parts that are going to happen over and over just into smaller parts. Maybe you reuse them in multiple places inside of your script, just creating those little reusable functions. Along those same lines, writing reusable and testable code, making it predictable, trying to be minimal in any side effects that it does. One of the examples here is avoid writing to files or sending emails from deep inside functions unless that's their main purpose, sending a function. Because what you don't want to do is you're like, hey, where is this file being created? Where is this script sending this email? And it's, buried, you go to this function and then it goes to this function and that function. And then finally like, oh, this is where it's sending the email. Try to be simple. Don't make it too complicated. Don't try to impress people with how cool or, complicated you're making something. Keep it simple, makes it easier to troubleshoot and go back and edit it and for somebody else to read it. Don't get fancy. That's all I'm saying here. Make sure you're putting things and objects out into the pipeline. Again, not doing something like write host, doing write information or write output. Make sure you go and test your functions individually before you put them into larger scripts. Again, just a quick summary here. Make sure you use meaningful variable names. Keep your formatting consistent. Writing helpful comments, adding your documentation. Find ways to handle errors as they come along. Don't hard code your values. And just break things down into smaller and smaller parts and put those into functions if that makes sense. Or as you're writing it out, just little pieces at a time. Okay, that does it for lesson 2 here. Let's close this out and let's talk about these in a more practical sense a little bit and go take a look at PSScriptAnalyzer. Now, what exactly is PSScriptAnalyzer? It is a static code analysis tool for PowerShell. It identifies best practices and maybe common issues you might have inside your script and provides suggestions for them. You can use them as you're developing your scripts locally on your system or put it into a CI/CD pipeline. This is where I've typically used it just for double checking things and modules that I'm putting out in the PowerShell gallery. Speaking of PowerShell gallery, it is just a module hosted out in the PowerShell gallery. You can do install module, PSScriptAnalyzer, and view the commands that go along with it. I believe just the main command, I don't know how many commands are in it, but there is invoke script analyzer. You can run that commandlet, give it the path to your PowerShell script, and it will find issues with it if there are any in a couple of different severities. There's information, warning, and error. And what it will do is it has a list of defined rules that it's checking everything against. And within that rule, there's a rule name, its severity, and then the output will show you what line or column that happens in, and there's some informational message on how you can fix or resolve it. There are some built-in rules for formatting, performance, and security. You can also make your own custom rule sets or only specify specific ones that you want to check the script against. In this case, avoid using write host. We've talked about that. You've declared variables more than assignments. Just another rule set there if you only want to check specific ones. If you want to look at the complete list of rules, you can run the git script analyzer rule, or maybe just look at ones that generate errors here. And let's go back through, as we just talked about, integrating PSScriptAnalyzer into your workflow. If you're writing a VS Code, your PowerShell scripts, which I would 100% highly recommend, there is the PowerShell extension. We talked about this back in the introduction. But if I go take a look at my list of installed extensions here, we'll just search for PowerShell real quick. Here is the one from Microsoft. I already have it installed, but this is going to give you things like syntax highlighting. It'll give you code snippets as you're writing things, IntelliSense. So as you're writing out, it'll say, oh, did you mean this command? Or just auto suggest things for you. If you're not using this inside of Visual Studio Code, you are 100% missing out. This is, I hate using the word like game changer or anything, but it's just, it makes writing scripts so much easier inside of Visual Studio Code. And as part of the PowerShell extension there, it does include PSScriptAnalyzer. Again, as also talked about, you can use this inside CI/CD pipelines if you're writing code in that way and collaborating inside of Git repositories or publishing it out somewhere. And it gets everyone on the same page of what they're working inside of their scripts, so you're all working with the same set of rules. Let's actually go take a look at an example of what you can do here. I have in the examples, I have an example of a bad script here. One of the first things we'll see here is the PowerShell extension and PSScriptAnalyzer is analyzing a couple things and finding some issues. So these are just warnings because they're in yellow here, and they're the curly lines there. If we go hover over this, we'll take a look. The commandlet do something uses an unapproved verb, just a warning. This should, use a verb that we took a look at in our list before. If we go over unused variable, well, the name of it there is pretty obvious, but it's saying you defined this variable, but you never used it. Same thing with our y variable here. That's just a good thing to double check logic. Maybe you meant to use it somewhere, or maybe you mistyped it somewhere. Again, PowerShell is not strongly typed. So I could do unused var here, but later down I just say not used var, and it's a different value or something like that. I could rename the variable, I could mistype it, anything like that. One of the other things here, again, results. You define results, but you never use it. And here we have where. Where is an alias of where object. Alias can introduce possible problems and make scripts harder to maintain. Use the full commandlet name here. Let's actually go back out to my PowerShell window and see what it looks like just running the invoke script analyzer tool into my command window here. All right, let me get into my examples folder here, and I'm going to run invoked script analyzer. As you can see, I ran this earlier already, and I'm just going to specify bad script right here in my current directory. And it's going to come back and give me a couple of other things that don't show up inside of Visual Studio Code. We saw our first one here, avoid using commandlet aliases. Where is an alias of where object. It gives us our line number here. We have just some trailing white space on line 8, just a formatting thing to help clean up. Then we have a couple examples here saying, quit, don't use write host, and it gives you just the message here. Avoid using this. It might not work on all your hosts. It doesn't work when there's no host. It cannot be suppressed. Use write output verbose or write information. Use some of these other commandlets instead. Anything else in here? Unused variables, results, the commandlet do something. So that's some of the other things that we saw. As you can see, these are all warnings here. We do have an informational thing. Trailing white space isn't going to, make or break your script or anything like that. What this is helpful in, and I think back when I was starting to really get into script writing and function writing and everything, I always wondered, am I doing this the right way? That's what always buggered me. Can I be more efficient with something? This isn't necessarily going to catch that, but these are the PowerShell norms and rules that you should be following. And this is a great way to just test your script against it. And then you just get better at writing and following these things. I actually ran this once against a script where I had a command like called set something, which means set is going to make a change. That's the whole point of set commands. And it came back and said, well, since you're running set command, you should include what if or confirm in your function that you're writing here. And that's when I went and learned about how to include that in scripts and functions that I'm writing. And that just further makes your scripts and functions more professional grade, quote unquote, and that you're following best practices. You're including some of those advanced things in there. I don't think I ever would have known that if I hadn't ran Invoke Script Analyzer against it, and it warned me against, it may have even been an error saying you should go put this in if your function here is making changes. Going back to Visual Studio Code here, one of the other things, in addition to some bad practices here, we can also see my formatting is just terrible. Everything is left aligned here. It's just not great. This is hard to read. I've got two things on the same line here. One of the great things that PowerShell extension does for you is it can auto format your files. If I press F1, and the first thing here is format document. If that's not the top thing, start writing format, or there is Shift Alt F. This is on a Windows system for automatically formatting here. Let's move this over here. We can see down here in Visual Studio Code, it recognizes that this is a PowerShell file, and it will format it according to PowerShell rules. It automatically does some things here and makes it a little bit better. We have curly bracket here and our indentation, else, and just formatting it can make things a lot better. While this is valid, it might just be better to go like this, or even realizing, oh, I don't use a Y variable. Let's delete that. Let's delete that. We'll go back down here. I forgot to output my results here, so that's why it's good to have something like that. So that gets rid of that. If I go into here, I think I can right click on this. Maybe not. If I hover back over it, I can do a quick fix and replace where with where object. Perfect. And like I said, this is an older formatting a little bit here, where we don't need to use curly brackets like that. And then changing our naming here, we'll just say get something instead, because our function here is also doing something, is also doing multiple things instead of just doing one thing. But again, this is an example of something bad. So there, very quickly, using a couple of things built into VS Code with the extensions, I formatted the document and then went through and updated, got rid of some unused variables, or realized I didn't output my results here like I should have. We maybe don't even really need return here. And there we go. Cleaned up our script. And this is a lot more readable now. And someone else could come in here and be able to work on it and make updates as needed. Going back and talking about lesson 1 and 2 a little bit about planning your scripts and everything, I want to jump out to a module that I have out there in the PowerShell gallery right now that I'm working on and adding functionality to. But I want to go back through that planning process a little bit and talk some more about it. Here we are out in my GitHub account. This repository is called PowerAZ+. That's the name of the module I'm writing. Just some additional things I wish I had inside when I'm working with PowerShell and Azure. One of those is a logic app. It's a flow chart, if this then that type of workflow. And at one point I had to export the definitions and what the workflow looked like and import it in somewhere else. And I wrote some custom functions around it. So we've got a lot of extra things here, but let me go down. And when I'm talking about identifying what you want your script to do, that was essentially line 41 here. Up here, I went through and I got the logic app information, but a part of that property is the definition and then converting it to string. I think it was in JSON format. So when I was writing this function, this was the first thing I had to figure out. How do I export this logic app definition? This was my key line here that I then also need to export it out to a file. And this was the first thing I figured out. And then from there, I start building out the rest of the script. In this case, I need to get the logic app. So I have logic app, get AZ logic app. That's a built-in Azure commandlet. And I'm passing in a PowerShell name. Well, where did name come from? That's a parameter on my custom function here. That way I don't hard code to specific logic apps. I can pass in different logic app names. I did some other things about getting values from the pipeline. Haven't really talked too much about that throughout this course, but that's another advanced topic here. I'm then exporting that out to a file. So I have another parameter here for file path. And I'm doing some validate script options here. Again, this is also could be improved. I could just run test path and test the path, and that will return true or false. I don't necessarily need to do all these things here. I'm writing this for later versions of PowerShell, so I include a custom error message here. I have a default value of get location if I don't specify a file path, so it'll run wherever I'm running this from. And then also have another parameter for file name if I want to specify a specific file name, making sure it ends in JSON because that's the formatting of the workflow is in. I do have a video where I go through all this a little bit in more detail, but this is what I'm talking about in, again, line 41. That's the core of what I wanted to solve, and then I started working out from there. I have my try catch block here, exporting that if that runs into some kind of error. I'm also checking, I passed in a logic app name that didn't exist, so that's what this is handling down here. No logic apps were found. Double check your spelling, make sure you're on the right subscription and everything. And then going into function, import logic app definition. So I've exported it, then I need to import it. There is a commandlet already available, set logic app, but you have to provide in the name, the resource group, the definition file path, and everything. I just wrote my own here, I think, to just handle that in a little bit better, where I'm just passing in name, resource group, and the file name instead of, they're essentially the same thing. I just kind of wrote my own wrapper around it a little bit. I do have a video where I go into this a little bit more detail. I'll probably put it in there, just showing the start to finish process of writing out a function like this and the thought process behind it. Next, I want to talk about some other resources. If you want to continue taking your PowerShell scripting to the next level, I believe this is a great book. It's by the great Don Jones and Jeff Hicks. Those are pillars of the PowerShell community. This is out on LeanPub, and it's called the PowerShell Scripting and Toolmaking book. Let's go look at the table of contents here. It starts going through introduction. Let me zoom in just a little bit for us here. Talks about setting up functions, going through building basic functions and modules, doing a little more thought process around tool design, starting with your command, building basic functions and modules, adding commandlet binding and parameterizing. That's something we've talked about. Make sure you're putting things as output, using verbose, warning, informational. Comment-based help, handling errors, how to go through and debugging, and then going through and building professional grade toolmaking. Again, this is a great book. I believe I've worked through most of it, and a lot of the things we've gone through in these 6 or 7 videos came out of things that I've learned in here. Writing full help, dynamic parameters, a lot more advanced functionality here. So again, if you're going through and you find yourself not sure what your next step is and increasing your skill set, I believe this would still be a great book for someone to go and purchase and, go through it and make your script writing skills even better. If you have a subscription to something like Pluralsight, I did mention Adam Bertram's course once or twice. This does look like an updated version than what I first watched, maybe back in the 2014, 2015, 2016 timeframe era. But this goes through, again, building advanced functions, talking about advanced function parameters, pipeline input, working with what if and confirm, talked about that a few minutes ago, and then going through and creating script modules and script manifest and everything and writing help content. A course like this is what really got me down going through and increasing my skills and writing more advanced things was Adam Bertram's course, going over a couple of those topics, and I've just continued from there. All right, well, that actually does it for this entire course and this series of videos. I hope you enjoyed it. I don't often ask this, but if there's something you liked about this video, or maybe something that didn't quite work for you, leave a comment down below. Find me out on Blue Sky or LinkedIn and send me a message. I usually accept all connection requests and everything like that. Just really great to hear if this series of videos helped you out. And maybe 6 months from now, you've written a couple of great scripts of something you've learned in here. I would be so happy to hear that and everything. But yeah, hopefully you found this useful, and we will see you next time.